You hear the snarls first. They come low and hungry, cutting through the howl of the Montana blizzard like jagged glass. Eleanor Wright's fingers, numb inside her gloves, tighten around the shotgun. It was her father's. Now it's all she has. Through the chaos of swirling snow, she sees them. Yellow eyes, burning like embers in the growing dark. 5, no, 6 pairs. They're moving in a half circle, a deadly crescent moon closing in on her and the last of her cattle. Get back! Her voice cracks, snatched away by the wind, sounding thin and useless even to her. The lead wolf, a monster of a creature, gaunt and scarred from 100 battles, takes a single, deliberate step forward. It's testing her. It knows she's alone. It knows she's afraid. Eleanor cocks the shotgun. The mechanism groans, stiff from the bitter cold. She has 2 shells left. Just 2. She knows it won't be enough, not for 6 hungry predators. A couple of years ago, she might have just fallen to her knees. She might have given up, surrendered to whatever cruel fate the good Lord had planned for her. But 18 months of being a widow, of fighting for every scrap on this barren land, had burned that softness out of her. It had been replaced by something harder. Something that wouldn't break. She would not die cowering in the snow. Come on then, she whispers, the words a prayer and a curse. She aims the barrel right between the leader's glowing eyes. The beast tenses, its powerful haunches lowering, coiling like a spring, ready to launch. Behind her, the cattle shift and cry, their warm breath exploding into clouds of steam in the frigid air. The Silver Creek Valley has never felt so big, so empty. Her nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. The town is twice that. No one is coming to help. The wolf springs forward, a blur of gray fur and yellow fangs, just as a gust of wind swallows the last of her lantern's flame. Everything plunges into absolute darkness. Eleanor fires blind. The roar of the shotgun is deafening, a clap of thunder in the silent, white world. But the sound that follows isn't the yelp of a wounded animal. It's a grunt, a human grunt, startled and deep and entirely out of place. A shadow impossibly large moves in the darkness between her and the wolves. The silhouette is massive, towering over her, towering over the predators. It's like a mountain just decided to stand up and walk. Easy now, a deep voice rumbles. The voice isn't directed at her. It's for the wolves. Through the driving snow, she watches this giant of a figure stand perfectly still, facing the wolf pack. He has no weapon. He shows no fear. One of his massive hands extends slowly, palm down, not a gesture of peace, but of pure dominance. The lead wolf, the scarred monster that was about to rip her throat out, hesitates. It stops mid-stride. Then, unbelievably, it takes a step back. Then another. The man turns his head slightly. They're hungry, not evil, he says, his voice cutting through the wind with ease. But they won't be bothering your cattle tonight. As if he'd given a command, the entire pack just melts away. They vanish into the blizzard, as silent as ghosts. Only then does the stranger turn to face her. In his other hand, a lantern miraculously sputters back to life, its flame growing steady, casting a golden glow on his face. And the face she sees belongs in old stories, the kind about gods walking the earth. His skin is weathered, stretched over high cheekbones and a jaw that could have been carved from granite, darkened with a few days of stubble. But it's his eyes that hold her. They are pale blue, almost see-through in the lantern light, and they are filled with a quiet understanding that seems to take in her entire, desperate situation in a single glance. You nearly shot me, Mrs. Wright. There's no anger in his voice, no accusation. He's just stating a fact. Eleanor lowers the shotgun, suddenly feeling how badly her hands are shaking. How do you know my name? Same way I know you've been trying to run this ranch alone since your husband Michael died in that mine collapse. He takes a step closer, and only now does she realize just how enormous he truly is. He must be close to 7.5 feet tall, made of solid muscle and bone. Folk talk, especially about a woman too stubborn to accept help. The cattle, which should be spooked, are now calm. They've gathered behind him, as if he's their protector. The storm is getting worse. Snow is driving sideways now, like a white curtain trying to smother the world. We need to get these animals to shelter, the giant says, already moving to herd them toward the barn. This storm's turning deadly. Eleanor should be terrified of this man who appeared out of nowhere, who talks to wolves, who knows her name and her history. But she isn't. Instead, she just follows his lead, herding her cattle through the deepening snow toward the barn, the cold air burning her lungs. I don't know your name, she manages to say between ragged breaths. Jackson Thornhill. He secures the heavy barn door behind the last steer, shutting out the worst of the wind. I have land up on Pine Ridge. The name means nothing to her, but she has heard the whispers. Rumors of a reclusive giant who built a homestead high in the mountains. Most folks in town dismissed it as a tall tale. Turns out the tale was true. In the relative quiet of the barn, she can see him more clearly now. His size is intimidating, no doubt about it. But there's a gentleness in his manner that's completely at odds with his appearance. A jagged scar runs from his right temple all the way down to his jaw, disappearing into his beard. It's the mark of a man who has seen violence and survived it. Why are you here, Mr. Thornhill? Eleanor asks, brushing snow from her coat, suddenly self-conscious of her own appearance. Her hair is a mess, her cheeks are raw with cold. Jackson studies her for a long, quiet moment. I've been watching you, Mrs. Wright. Those words should have chilled her to the bone. A giant stranger, admitting he's been spying on her from the mountains. But the way he says it, it's with a simple, raw honesty. There's no threat in it. It's something else entirely. For several weeks now, he continues, moving to check on a calf, his enormous hands surprisingly gentle. Watching you chop wood until your hands bleed. Watching you mend fences in the freezing rain. Watching you stretch your dwindling supplies while everyone in town whispers about when you'll finally give up and sell. Eleanor's throat tightens. She feels exposed, as if he's peeled back all the layers of pride she uses to face the world. I don't recall inviting an audience to my struggles, she says, her voice sharp. No, he agrees, straightening to his full, intimidating height. You didn't, but I've seen enough. He takes a step closer, and his shadow covers her completely. I've seen enough to know what I came here to say. Something in his tone makes her heart hammer against her ribs. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry beast, rattling the old timbers of the barn. Your roof is leaking in 3 places, he says, his voice a low rumble. Your smokehouse needs repairs before the spring thaw. The north pasture fence won't last another month, and you're down to your last sack of flour. Each observation is a blow, not because it's an intrusion, but because it's the truth, the hard, secret truth she's been hiding from everyone. What is your point, Mr. Thornhill? Pride makes her voice sound harsher than she intends. My point, Mrs. Wright, he says, his pale blue eyes locking onto hers, is that you won't survive another winter alone. He says it without cruelty, just a simple, brutal statement of fact. And I'm proposing a solution. An image flashes in her mind. This mountain of a man, his capable hands fixing her roof, mending her fences, bringing order to her crumbling world. For a split second, the temptation to just say yes, to accept any help he offers, is overwhelming. But Eleanor Wright is not a woman who accepts charity. I don't need saving, Mr. Thornhill. No, he agrees, and his answer surprises her. You don't need saving. He pauses, letting the weight of his next words settle in the cold air. You need a partner. Before she can even process that, he reaches into his heavy wool coat and pulls out something unexpected. A small, leather-bound notebook. Your husband kept records of everything, he says, holding it out to her. Debts, plans, hopes. Eleanor takes it with numb fingers. She recognizes Michael's neat, careful handwriting instantly. She'd searched for his account books for months after his death, assuming they'd been lost in the mine collapse. How did you... That's not important now. Jackson glances at the barn door, where snow is already drifting in under the frame. What's important is getting you back to the house before this storm traps us both out here. He's right. The short walk from the barn to the house is a battle. Snowdrifts are already up to her waist, and the wind is a physical force pushing against them with relentless fury. Jackson moves through it like a ship through water, creating a path for her to follow. The house is dark and cold. Jackson moves with an efficiency that's mesmerizing. He builds a fire in the hearth with a few quick, expert movements while Eleanor lights the lamps. The familiar room seems to shrink around his massive frame, suddenly looking smaller, shabbier. You should get into some dry clothes, he says, his back to her as he coaxes the flames higher. I'll make coffee. The simple domestic instruction, as if they've done this 100 times before, snaps her back to reality. A stranger is in her house. A giant who admits to watching her for weeks is giving her orders. Mr. Thornhill, she says, straightening her spine, trying to reclaim some control. I appreciate your help with the wolves and the cattle, but I think it's time you explained exactly why you're here. He turns from the fireplace. The firelight throws dramatic shadows across his scarred face. For the first time, she sees a deep weariness in his eyes. It's not physical tiredness. It's something older, heavier. I'm here because I'm tired of being alone, he says, the words simple and raw. And because you're the strongest woman I've ever seen. The blizzard rages outside, sealing them together in the small, warm circle of light from the fire. I'm 34 years old, Mrs. Wright, he says. He's rehearsed this, she can tell. He's choosing his words carefully. I have good land, healthy livestock, and a house built to withstand anything these mountains can throw at it. What I don't have is family. What I don't have is someone to build a life with. Understanding dawns on her, slow and then all at once like a sunrise. Mr. Thornhill, are you proposing marriage? Yes. His gaze is steady, unflinching. A partnership between equals. I'm not looking for a housekeeper or a servant. I'm looking for a wife who understands what it means to fight for something. Eleanor's legs feel weak. She sinks into the nearest chair, clutching Michael's notebook to her chest like a shield. You don't even know me, she finally whispers. I know enough. He remains standing, a towering shadow against the firelight. I know you were the only child of Reverend Wright before he moved back east. I know you haven't set foot in a church since your mother died in childbirth when you were 12. I know your marriage to Michael was childless, though not for lack of trying. Each detail is a pinprick, an invasion, but his tone holds no judgment. And what do I know of you? She counters, finding a spark of her old fire. A stranger who shows up in a blizzard and admits to watching me for weeks? Why should I trust a single word you say? Jackson reaches into his coat again. This time he pulls out an ornate gold pocket watch. He opens the case, the firelight glinting off its polished surface. This belonged to my grandfather. He brought it from Scotland, carried it for 40 years on the frontier. He gave it to my father and said it wasn't just for telling time, but for remembering that every moment counts. His voice grows quiet. My father carried it until he died at Antietam, Confederate artillery. I was there serving with the Union. I couldn't get to him in time. The revelation clicks another piece of the puzzle into place. The watchfulness, the scar, the eyes that have seen too much. He's a veteran, a survivor of one of the bloodiest battles in history. I'm sorry for your loss, she says, the words feeling small and inadequate. It was a long time ago. He closes the watch with a soft click and puts it away. The point, Mrs. Wright, is that I'm not offering you pretty words or empty promises. I'm offering you honesty. I'm offering you a future that doesn't depend on whether you can stretch your flower until spring. And what do you expect in return? The question is blunt, but it has to be asked. His answer is just as direct. Children. The word hangs in the air, shocking and simple. Before the spring thaw, I want you carrying my child. The sheer boldness of it should offend her. It should make her throw him out into the storm. Instead, a strange, unexpected warmth spreads through her chest. It's a feeling she thought was long dead. It's hope, and right behind it, a cold, familiar dread. That may not be possible, she says, looking away, unable to meet his intense gaze. Michael and I, we tried, for years. Perhaps, he says, his voice a low, matter-of-fact rumble. You just needed the right man to plant the seed. He speaks of it so plainly, as if discussing planting crops. It makes the impossible somehow feel possible. Either way, he adds, we won't know until we try. Heat rises in her cheeks. You speak very confidently for a man proposing to a woman he just met. I'm not a boy fumbling through a courtship, Mrs. Wright. I know what I want. I'm proposing that before spring, you'll have my child growing inside you. And by summer, you'll have a family again. The raw certainty in his voice is a strange comfort. It's a rock in the middle of the storm that has been her life for the past 18 months. And if I refuse, then I'll leave when the storm breaks, he says, his expression turning grave. And you'll never see me again. I won't force myself where I'm not wanted. But think carefully, Mrs. Wright. Winter is here, and it doesn't care if you're ready for it or not. She looks down at the notebook in her hands, needing something to focus on besides his piercing blue eyes. She opens it, her fingers tracing Michael's familiar script. She flips past pages of cattle sales and supply lists until one entry, near the end, catches her eye. The date is November 18th, just a few weeks before the mine collapse. The entry reads, borrowed $1,000 from H, 6 months to repay. God help me if E ever finds out. H, she thinks. Who is H? And who is E? It couldn't be her, Eleanor. Michael always referred to her as my wife in his notes. Why would he use a single initial? What is it? Jackson's voice is close. He's moved nearer, his shadow falling across the page. She snaps the notebook shut. Nothing. Nothing important. But her mind is racing. Michael was in debt. A secret debt to someone named H. A debt he was terrified of someone named E discovering. What other secrets had her husband been keeping? I need time, she says, her voice barely a whisper. I need time to think. Jackson nods, as if he expected it. Of course. The storm will keep us both here until morning. You can give me your answer then. He settles his huge frame into one of her sturdy wooden kitchen chairs, looking surprisingly comfortable. You should get some rest, he says. Tomorrow will bring decisions enough. Eleanor retreats to her bedroom, clutching Michael's notebook. She doesn't expect to sleep. She expects to lie awake all night, staring into the darkness, weighing an impossible choice. But the moment her head hits the pillow, exhaustion takes over, and she dreams. She dreams of wolves with pale blue eyes, and a giant's hand reaching out to her in the middle of a blizzard, offering her a future she never thought possible. The world is silent when she wakes. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Eleanor dresses quickly, her mind surprisingly clear. She knows what she has to do. The thought fills her with a strange mix of terror and excitement. She walks into the main room and finds Jackson already awake, tending a fresh fire in the hearth. The smell of coffee and frying bacon fills the small house. It's a smell of home, of life, a smell she hasn't had in months. He's cooked breakfast. Biscuits are warming by the fire. You didn't have to do that, she says, suddenly aware of how tangled her hair must be. Seemed the least I could do. He pours coffee into her cup, his huge hands making the porcelain look like a child's toy. He leaves room for milk, just the way she likes it. How did he know that? Another mystery. I need to check the cattle, she says. Already did. They're fine. Fed them what was left of your hay. He sits across from her at the small table. You've made your decision. It's not a question. I have conditions, she says, meeting his gaze. A flicker of something in his eyes. Amusement, respect. Name them. 1 month, she says, setting her cup down. We live together for 1 month, a trial period, before any formal commitment. I keep my name until there's a ceremony, and I keep this house as security. Security against what? Against this not working out, she says, her shoulders straight. I need to know I have a place to come back to. If we find we're not compatible. Jackson considers her terms, his face unreadable. 1 month is reasonable, he says, and you can keep this house as long as you need to feel secure. He glances around the small room, at the patched walls and the sagging roof beams. He accepts her terms without argument, which throws her off balance. She was ready for a fight. Why me? She asks, the question she's been holding back since he first appeared. There are younger women in town, unmarried women. His answer is immediate. Because when I saw you splitting wood with bloody hands and refusing to quit, I saw a woman who doesn't surrender. That's worth more than youth or family connections. The blunt honesty of it strips away any pretense. He wants her for her strength. It's both a disappointment and a relief. When would we leave? Tomorrow, he says. The weather should hold for a few days. Enough time to pack what you need. Tomorrow. Suddenly, it's terrifyingly real. I'll need to talk to Margaret Thompson, she says, thinking out loud. She can watch the house. I'll be back in the morning with a wagon for your things. He stands, pulling on his heavy coat. He pauses at the door. Unless you've changed your mind. No, she says, and the firmness in her own voice surprises her. No, I haven't changed my mind. He studies her for a moment longer, then nods once and heads out the door. Mr. Thornhill, she calls after him. He turns back, one eyebrow raised. My first name is Eleanor, she says, managing a small smile. If we're to be partners, you should use it. Eleanor, he says, testing the name on his tongue. I'm Jackson. And with that, something shifts. The world tilts on its axis. After he leaves, she sinks back into her chair, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the air. She wonders if she's just made the wisest decision of her life, or the most desperate mistake. Margaret Thompson's reaction is exactly what Eleanor expected. Shock, then worry, then a flood of questions disguised as concern. Marriage! Margaret sets her teacup down so hard it splashes onto the tablecloth. To Jackson Thornhill, the giant from Pine Ridge who barely says 2 words to anyone? Eleanor had made the hard journey to the Thompson farm as soon as the path was clear. She knew she had to tell her closest friend before the rumors started flying. It's not a traditional arrangement, Eleanor admits. It's a practical partnership. There's nothing practical about tying yourself to a stranger, Eleanor. Margaret reaches across the table and grabs her hand, especially not a man who, well, who looks like he does. You mean because of his size? Or the scar? Eleanor feels a strange need to defend him. Both. There are stories about him, you know. They say he was a Union soldier who went mad after Antietam. Say he killed men with his bare hands. He told me his father died at Antietam, Eleanor says quietly. That doesn't make him a monster. I'm not saying he is, Margaret sighs, but you barely know him. I knew Michael for 2 years before we married, Eleanor says, a bitterness creeping into her voice that surprises them both. And I just found out he was keeping secrets from me. The words slip out before she can stop them. She tells Margaret about the notebook, about the mysterious debt. Margaret hesitates for just a second too long. You knew, Eleanor asks. I suspected, Margaret admits, suddenly busy with the teapot. Carl saw Michael talking with a businessman from Helena, a man named Hargrove. It was all very hush-hush. Hargrove, the H from the notebook. The entry mentioned $1,000, Eleanor says, her hands tightening around her cup. The debt was due in May, the month after Michael died. What was going on? Did this Hargrove ever come to collect? Margaret asks. Not that I know of. Eleanor pushes the thought away. But that's why I'm here. I need a favor. I need you and Carl to watch my property while I'm away. Margaret's eyes fill with fear for her. So you are keeping it as insurance. You don't trust this man. It's not about trust, Eleanor says, though she knows it's a lie. It's about being practical. She can't explain the strange feeling of rightness she felt when Jackson made his proposal. She can't explain the hope, so she tells her the one thing she knows Margaret will understand. He wants children, she says quietly. He thinks I can give them to him. Understanding dawns in Margaret's eyes. Oh, Eleanor. What if he's right? Eleanor whispers, voicing the question that has haunted her for a day and a night. What if all this time, it wasn't me? What if it was Michael? And what if he's wrong? Margaret counters gently. What if you bind yourself to this man, move to his isolated home, and you still can't give him the children he wants? What then? It's the question Eleanor has been too afraid to ask herself. Then at least I'll know, she says. At least I'll have tried. Margaret sighs, defeated by her friend's determination. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. So soon? Eleanor, please, reconsider, At least wait until spring. Mountain winters are brutal. Jackson says his house is built to last. Eleanor tries to smile. And I've never been afraid of a little bad weather. It's not the weather I'm worried about, Margaret murmurs. The journey to Pine Ridge is a slow climb into another world. The roads get rougher, the air gets thinner, the pines grow taller, their branches heavy with snow. Jackson handles the team with a quiet, easy confidence. He points out landmarks, sharing small pieces of his life. That meadow is full of wildflowers in the spring, he says, gesturing to a vast snow-covered expanse. By midday, they stop to rest the horses by a half-frozen stream. We'll reach the property before dark, he says, helping her down from the wagon. His hand is warm and calloused, strong but careful. How long have you lived up here? She asks. 3 years. Started building the summer after Gettysburg. Finished last year. You built it yourself? A flicker of pride crosses his face. Every beam and board. It's built to last for generations. The casual mention of generations, their future generations, hangs in the crisp mountain air between them. As they round a final bend in the road, Eleanor sees it, and it takes her breath away. It's not a cabin. It's a fortress. A magnificent 2-story house made of massive silvered pine logs, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smoke curls from 2 stone chimneys. Barns and outbuildings form a protective circle around a central yard. It's not just a house, it's a homestead, a kingdom carved out of the wilderness. It's beautiful, she says, the word feeling too small. It's built to last, he says, echoing his earlier promise. As they pull into the yard, the front door opens and a small, wiry old man with a shock of white hair steps out onto the porch. Thomas, Jackson calls out. Didn't expect you to stay. Thought somebody ought to warm the place up, the old man grumbles. Wasn't sure your new bride would appreciate a cold hearth. Eleanor feels her cheeks burn at the word bride. The old man's name is Thomas Blackburn. He's Jackson's nearest neighbor, though near means 3 miles over a ridge. He helps her down from the wagon with surprising strength. Known this giant since he first staked his claim, Thomas says with a gruff affection in his voice. Watched him build this place beam by beam, stubborn as a mule about doing it right. After Thomas leaves them to get settled, Eleanor finds herself alone with Jackson in their new home. The inside is just as impressive as the outside. Polished wood floors, a massive stone fireplace, and beautiful rustic furniture that Jackson clearly crafted with his own hands. Kitchen's through there, he says. Bedrooms are upstairs, 3 of them. He hesitates for a moment. You'll have your own room until you decide otherwise. The consideration, the respect for her boundaries touches her. Thank you, she says softly. He shows her to a room at the top of the stairs. It's spacious with a large 4-poster bed covered in quilts. My room is at the end of the hall, he says, setting her trunk down. The washroom is between us. There's hot water if you'd like a bath. The thought of a hot bath after the long, cold journey is pure bliss. When she's finally alone, soaking in the steaming, herb-scented water, her mind goes back to Michael's notebook. Borrowed $1,000 from H. God help me if E ever finds out. Who was H? Victor Hargrove, the man Margaret mentioned. But who was E? And why was Michael so afraid of this person finding out about the loan? Later, wrapped in her shawl, she finds Jackson in his room. He's sitting at a small desk, writing in a journal, his huge hands making the pen look tiny. I wanted to thank you, she says from the doorway, for the bath, and for giving me time. He sets down his pen. The lamplight highlights the jagged scar on his face. A month, he says, his pale blue eyes meeting hers. That was our agreement. You set the pace. Good night, then, she says, her heart suddenly racing. Good night, Eleanor. Back in her own room, she slips beneath the heavy quilts. Her last thought before sleep takes her is of Jackson's hands. Hands that could build a fortress or gently tend a calf. Hands that could break a man in 2. Or the thought follows her into her dreams. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, he gives her a tour of the property. It's more than a homestead. It's a legacy. A well-managed kingdom with sturdy fences, a young orchard, and pastures ready for a large herd. You've accomplished all of this in just 3 years, she says, genuinely impressed. I had a clear vision, he says, his breath clouding in the cold air. And no distractions. His words hang there, a silent acknowledgement that she is now part of that vision. A distraction or destination? Later, sitting by the fire, she finally asked the question that's been burning in her mind. Jackson, how well did you know my husband, Michael? His expression remains neutral, but something flickers in his eyes. A shadow. We met a few times in town, he says slowly. Exchanged pleasantries. Nothing more. She doesn't believe him. It's just, you found his notebook. You seem to know things about his death that weren't widely known. And you came for me specifically. There's something you're not telling me. He is silent for a long, long time. The only sound is the crackle of the fire and the sigh of the wind outside. You're right, he says finally, his voice a low rumble. Your husband and I weren't friends, but I knew more about him than I let on. He meets her gaze, and the weariness is back in his eyes, deeper than ever. I was aware he'd taken on debt from Victor Hargrove, and I was aware that Hargrove is not a man who forgives his debts. That doesn't answer why you chose me, she presses. He turns away from her, staring into the flames. When he finally speaks, his words are careful, measured. I told you, I chose you for your strength. The rest isn't relevant to our arrangement. It is to me, she says, her voice rising. I've agreed to share my life with you, to potentially bear your children. I deserve the truth. He turns back to face her, and his expression is grim. You're right, he says, his voice heavy with a weight she can't understand. You deserve the truth, but I'm not sure you're ready to hear it. Let me be the judge of that. He studies her for a long moment, then gives a single, sharp nod. Very well, he says, but not tonight. Tomorrow, I'll tell you everything. But I'm warning you, Eleanor. The truth is uglier than you can possibly imagine. She goes to bed that night with a cold knot of dread in her stomach. What truth could be so terrible? What secret was this giant of a man hiding? In her room, she opens Michael's notebook again, searching for any clue she might have missed. And she finds it. Near the back, on a page she'd overlooked, is another cryptic entry. Met with T at the Ridge. Discussed J and the arrangement. God forgive me for what I must do. T. Thomas Blackburn? J. Jackson? What arrangement? The questions chase her into a restless sleep, where her dead husband's face twists and morphs into Jackson's, both of them whispering secrets she can't quite hear. The next morning, the air is sharp and cold. The sky is a brilliant, unforgiving blue. Jackson is outside, splitting wood with powerful, rhythmic strokes. He moves with a brutal efficiency that is both mesmerizing and terrifying. When he comes inside, his cheeks are red from the cold. His pale blue eyes are intense. They eat breakfast in silence. The tension is so thick she can feel it in her teeth. Finally, she can't stand it anymore. You promised me answers, she says quietly. He sets down his fork. I did. I found another entry in Michael's notebook, she says, her voice shaking slightly. It mentioned a T, a J, and an arrangement. Was T. Thomas Blackburn? Were you J? A muscle twitches in Jackson's jaw. Yes, to both. What was the arrangement, Jackson? He takes a deep breath, and the story comes pouring out, a torrent of secrets that shatters the world she thought she knew. Your husband was in trouble, Eleanor, he begins, his voice low and grave. Serious trouble. The money he borrowed from Hargrove, it was to finance a new mining claim. Michael had found something big, a silver vein. A mother lode that could have made him one of the richest men in the territory. Eleanor stares at him, stunned. Michael, a poor farmer, had discovered a fortune? He came to me, Jackson continues. He knew my history, knew I had experience dealing with men like Hargrove. He was desperate. He was afraid. Not just for himself, for you. Why didn't he tell me? She whispers. He wanted to protect you. He thought he could pay Hargrove back before you ever had to know. But the mine collapse, it changed everything. A horrifying thought begins to form in her mind. You're saying Michael's death wasn't an accident? Jackson's eyes are like chips of ice. I'm saying I don't know for certain, but I know that Hargrove's men were seen near the mine in the days before the collapse, and I know that Michael had started asking questions about Hargrove's other business dealings. Dangerous questions. The room seems to tilt. Her husband, murdered? Why didn't you go to the sheriff? With what? Rumors? Jackson shakes his head. Hargrove has powerful friends, including Judge Thompson in Silver Creek. Any accusation would have been buried. Judge Thompson, Margaret's brother-in-law, the web of corruption is bigger, darker than she ever imagined. So what was your arrangement with Michael? She asks, her voice trembling. Jackson looks her straight in the eye, and his next words hit her like a physical blow. If anything happened to him, he says, I promised I would look after you. I promised I would keep you safe from Hargrove. The confession hangs in the air, cold and sharp. Her entire world has been a lie. So all of this, your proposal, your interest in me, it was all because of a promise, a duty to my dead husband? The words taste like ash in her mouth. It started that way, Jackson admits, his voice raw with an emotion she can't name. I agreed to watch you from a distance, to make sure you were safe. But the watching, it became more than that. His voice softens. I saw your strength, Eleanor. I saw your fire. I saw you refuse to break when anyone else would have shattered. It wasn't duty that brought me to your door in that blizzard. It was something else. He hesitates as if the words are foreign to him. Something I haven't felt in a very long time. The sincerity in his voice is undeniable, but the revelations have left her reeling. She stands up, needing air, needing space. I need to think, she says, grabbing her coat. Eleanor. His voice stops her at the door. There's one more thing you need to know. She turns back, her hand on the knob. Hargrove never collected on Michael's debt, he says, his voice grim, which means it's still outstanding. And now that you appear to have remarried, you've just made yourself a much more valuable target. He won't just come for your land, Eleanor. He'll come for Michael's silver claim, and he'll go through you to get it. The implication is terrifying. Her arrangement with Jackson, meant to provide security, has just painted a giant target on her back. She flees the house, stumbling through the deep snow, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She walks until she reaches the frozen stream at the edge of the property, the cold air burning her lungs. Jackson had come to her out of duty, but he stayed for another reason. Hargrove wasn't just a loan shark, he was a potential murderer, and now he was coming for her. As she stands there trying to make sense of it all, a flash of movement at the edge of the woods catches her eye. It's too big to be a deer, too deliberate to be the wind. Hello? She calls out, her voice swallowed by the vast, snowy silence. There's no answer, but the feeling of being watched is overwhelming. A cold dread, completely different from the blizzard's chill, creeps down her spine. She turns and walks back toward the house, her pace quickening. She glances over her shoulder. Another flicker of movement, deeper in the trees this time. She starts to run. By the time the house is in sight, she's in a full panic, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Jackson is on the porch before she even reaches it, his face a mask of concern that turns to alarm when he sees her expression. What happened? He asks, his voice sharp. Someone's out there, she pants. In the woods, watching the house. Jackson's hand goes instinctively to the revolver she now sees is holstered at his belt. His face becomes hard, the face of a soldier. Get inside, he says, his voice a low command. Lock the door. Jackson, no. Now, Eleanor. He moves toward the tree line with the silent, fluid grace of a predator. He disappears into the shadows of the pines, leaving her alone in the terrifying silence. Minutes feel like hours. She paces the house, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, he emerges from the trees, his expression grim. She unlocks the door before he reaches it. Well? Tracks, he says, stomping the snow from his boots. 2 men. They left when they saw you heading back. Hargrove's men, she whispers. Most likely, he says, his jaw tight. They were just watching. For now. But they know you're here with me. Hargrove will make his move soon. The storm bought us some time. But now that the weather has cleared, He looks at her, his pale eyes intense. Now, we prepare for war. The next few days are a blur of preparations. Jackson is a different man. The quiet, gentle giant is gone, replaced by a cold, calculating soldier. He shows her everything: hidden storage spaces under the floorboards, an escape route through a secret root cellar that connects the house to the barn. He teaches her how to load and fire his revolver, his large hands guiding hers with a steady, impersonal touch. He is preparing her for the worst. Their only contact with the outside world is Thomas Blackburn, who brings news from town. Beck and Hargrove's other men are set for a hearing in front of Judge Thompson, a hearing that Thomas says will be a sham. We need more than their testimony, Eleanor says, the idea forming as she speaks. We need to talk to Jim Burns, Michael's old mining partner. If anyone knows the truth about the collapse, it's him. They find Burns living in a secluded cabin in a place called Granite Creek. He's a haunted man with a pronounced limp and eyes that have seen too much. At first, he denies everything. But when Eleanor tells him they found Michael's hidden map, his story changes. You'd better come inside, he says, his voice a low whisper. In the dusty, cluttered cabin, the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place. Burns reveals a leather portfolio Michael had given him for safekeeping just days before he died. It's filled with geological surveys and assay reports. Silver, Burns says, his voice filled with a kind of reverence. The richest vein I've seen in 20 years. A true motherlode. He confirms everything. Michael borrowed the money from Hargrove to develop the claim in secret. But Hargrove wanted more than just his money back. He wanted the mine itself. I always suspected the collapse wasn't an accident, Burns says, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. There were new timbers brought in that week, timbers that weren't up to standard. I was supposed to be there that day, but I came down with a fever. It saved my life. He looks at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a terrible sorrow. Michael was a good man. He deserved better. Will you testify to this? Jackson asks. Burns hesitates. Testify in Judge Thompson's court? That's suicide. Not in local court, Jackson says. We'll take it to the territorial authorities in Helena. They form a plan, a desperate, dangerous plan. Burns will gather the evidence. Eleanor will find old letters of introduction from her father that might get them an audience with the territorial magistrate. In 3 days, they will meet at Thomas Blackburn's hunting cabin and ride for Helena together. But they never get the chance. When they ride back to the homestead, their blood runs cold. 3 official-looking carriages are parked in their yard, and standing in front of the house, dressed in his black judicial robes, is Judge Thompson. With him is a well-dressed, confident-looking man with the coldest eyes Eleanor has ever seen. Victor Hargrove. Legal ambush, Jackson says, his voice a low growl. He's forcing our hand. Judge Thompson informs them that Hargrove has filed a claim for the property to satisfy Michael's outstanding debt. He presents a promissory note bearing a signature that is a near-perfect forgery of Michael's. This signature is a fake, Eleanor says, her voice ringing with a confidence she doesn't feel. Hargrove just smiles. Grief can cloud one's judgment, Mrs. Wright. The judge informs them that until the matter can be settled in his court, they are forbidden from selling any assets. And to ensure the property remains secure, they must post a bond. $500, Hargrove says, the number a death sentence. Cash, of course. It's a checkmate. They don't have the money. They'll be forced to vacate. Hargrove will win. But just as despair begins to set in, a new voice cuts through the tension. That won't be necessary, Judge. All heads turn. Riding into the yard are 3 men: Sheriff Daniels, Thomas Blackburn, and Carl Thompson. Sheriff, the judge says, his voice dripping with annoyance, this is a civil matter. Actually, Your Honor, the sheriff says, dismounting with a slow, deliberate confidence. It's become a criminal matter as well. I've just come from interviewing Mr. Hargrove's employees again. It seems they've had a change of heart about their employer. Hargrove's smile falters for the first time. They've confessed, Hargrove, the sheriff continues. Confessed to being hired to cause the mine collapse. Confessed to being paid from an account that we traced directly back to you. The world seems to stop. The truth is out, raw and undeniable. But it gets worse for Hargrove. Carl Thompson steps forward. And my wife Margaret, after your visit, Mrs. Wright, she wrote to her cousin in Helena, a man with some influence. It seems the territorial magistrate, Judge Freeman, was very interested to hear about allegations of judicial impropriety in this district. In fact, he arrived in Silver Creek this morning. Judge Thompson's face goes white as a sheet. The legal ambush has turned. The hunters have become the hunted. Hargrove and Judge Thompson are taken into custody. The crowd that had gathered to watch the proceedings erupts in cheers. For years, these men had ruled the valley with fear and corruption. Now their reign is over. As the official party rides away, a new kind of quiet settles over the homestead. It's not the silence of fear, but of peace, of a battle won. It's not over, Jackson says, his hand on her arm steadying her. This is just the beginning. But Eleanor knows the worst is behind them. They have the evidence. They have the claim. They have the truth. And they have each other. That night after Thomas and Carl have left, they sit by the fire. The house is quiet, safe. Our arrangement, Jackson says, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. Our month is nearly up. Eleanor looks at him, this giant of a man who crashed into her life and shattered it, only to help her rebuild it into something stronger, something more real than she ever could have imagined. Given everything that's happened, she says, her voice soft but steady, all we've learned about each other, do you still want that commitment, Jackson? He stands up and walks to her, his massive frame blocking out the firelight. He kneels before her, taking her small, work-roughened hands in his. I propose to you because I saw your strength, he says, his pale blue eyes filled with a raw, honest emotion that makes her heart ache. What's happened since then has only confirmed what I knew from the beginning, that you are a woman worth building a life with, a family with, an empire with. He looks at her, and in his eyes she sees her future. Not a future of survival, but of triumph. So yes, Eleanor, he says, his voice thick with a feeling that is more than just respect, more than just partnership. I still want that commitment, now more than ever. If you'll have me. Tears stream down her face, but they are not tears of grief or fear. They are tears of joy, of release. I came to your mountain seeking security, she whispers. What I found was everything. She leans forward and kisses him, and in that kiss is the promise of a future forged in fire, a partnership built on a foundation of truth and trust, and a love as strong and enduring as the mountains themselves. The fight wasn't over. Hargrove was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. The barn fire was his parting gift. Eleanor woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the terrifying orange glow of flames, devouring the structure they had fought so hard to protect. By the time they got the blaze under control, the barn was a smoldering ruin. Hargrove's farewell message, Jackson said, his face a grim mask of soot and fury. That was the moment Eleanor knew they couldn't just wait for justice. They had to seize it. They rode to Silver Creek to confront him, only to find the town buzzing. Judge Freeman had moved faster than anyone expected. Formal charges had been filed. Hargrove and Judge Thompson were being transported to Helena for trial within the hour. Their window was closing. They found Hargrove in the hotel dining room, eating an elaborate breakfast as if he didn't have a care in the world. Mrs. Wright, he said with a cold smile, come to gloat? I've come about Michael's silver claim, she said, cutting straight to the point, the one you had him killed for. He just laughed, a dry, humorless sound. But when she offered him a deal, the maps and surveys to the claim in exchange for a full confession, a flicker of interest showed in his dead eyes. An intriguing proposition, he said, but fundamentally flawed. You see, Mrs. Wright, I no longer require your cooperation. A chill went down her spine. Did you think I would come to this backwater without a contingency plan? He sneered. My surveyors located the general area of the claim weeks ago, based on your husband's not-so-secret movements. Even as we speak, my associates are securing the site. He described the location perfectly. The Bear's Head Rock Formation, the creek running west to east. He knew. They left him there, being led away in chains by the marshals. And they rode. They rode harder than they had ever ridden before. for Blackwater Ridge. They found Hargrove's men just as he'd said, 4 of them, armed and already tearing into the hillside with picks and shovels, causing untold damage. If Hargrove can't have it, he'll make sure no one can, Jackson growled. What followed was a desperate gamble. Jackson, using his old soldier skills, created a distraction, a controlled rock slide on the far side of the ridge, drawing the men away from the main vein. It bought them just enough time. Sheriff Daniels and his deputies arrived like the cavalry in an old dime novel, arresting Hargrove's men after a brief, brutal fight. It was finally over. Standing on the ridge, looking out over the land that had cost her husband his life, but had given her a new one, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. "What will you do now?" Jackson asked, his voice quiet beside her. "Develop it," she said without hesitation. "With partners I trust. Jim Burns, the Thompsons, Thomas." She turned to face him. "And you, if you're willing." He didn't answer with words. He just took her hand in his large warm fingers, wrapping around hers. And in that simple touch, a new contract was sealed. A new future was born. As they rode home, side by side, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of fire and gold, Eleanor knew she had found something more valuable than silver. She had found a partnership forged in adversity, a respect that had grown into something deeper, and a love as wild and unshakable as the land itself. The quiet giant who had come to her in a blizzard hadn't just saved her life. He had shown her how to live it. Together they would build their empire, not on a foundation of greed and secrets, but on the bedrock of truth, courage, and a bond that nothing and no one could ever break. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tales of justice from the dark corners of history. And let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in Eleanor's shoes? Until next time, stay safe out there.